The king who lost his head. Charles Stuart was not born to wear the crown. A small, sickly child with a stammer, he became heir only after his charismatic older brother, Henry, died unexpectedly. When he ascended the thrones of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1625, he carried with him an unshakable, almost religious conviction, that he was a king by divine right, answerable only to God. This belief was the seed of his tragedy. From the start, Charles clashed with Parliament. He needed their money for costly foreign wars, but he scorned their attempts to limit his power. He saw their demands as insolence, a challenge to God's chosen ruler. After a few years of bitter squabbling, Charles took a momentous and fateful step in 1629, he dissolved Parliament and vowed to rule alone. For the next 11 years, a period known to his critics as the 11 Years Tyranny, Charles governed without calling a single representative. He bypassed Parliament for money, resurrecting ancient taxes and imposing new ones, most infamously ship money, which was traditionally levied only on coastal towns during wartime. He also tried to force a high Anglican style of worship, complete with ornate ceremonies and prayer books, onto his increasingly Puritan and Presbyterian subjects. To many, this looked suspiciously like a slide toward Catholicism, especially since his beloved wife, Queen Henrietta Maria, was openly a Roman Catholic. The true breaking point came not in England, but in Scotland. When Charles tried to force the new English prayer book on the Scots, they rose up in fury, signing the National Covenant and forming an army. With his treasury empty and a Scottish army threatening to invade, Charles was finally forced to recall Parliament in 1640. This time, Parliament refused to be dismissed. Led by powerful, defiant men like John Pym, they demanded radical changes, the dismantling of the king's courts, the arrest of his chief ministers, and the absolute assurance that they could not be dissolved without their own consent. Humiliated and furious, Charles made one last desperate, theatrical mistake. In January 1642, he marched into the House of Commons with an armed guard, intending to arrest 5 leading members of Parliament for treason. They had already fled. The king had violated the sanctuary of the House, and his action was seen as an act of war. The long-brewing political storm finally broke. In the summer of 1642, the English Civil War began. The country split between the king's royalists, or cavaliers, and the parliamentarians, or roundheads. The war was long and brutal, but the parliamentarians, especially the highly disciplined New Model army led by Oliver Cromwell, eventually gained the upper hand. Charles was finally defeated, captured, and his last, desperate attempts to regain power failed. By late 1648, the political moderates in Parliament had been purged, leaving behind a radical, Rump Parliament, determined to settle the score. They declared that the king could be tried, setting up a high court of justice. Charles refused to acknowledge the court's authority, maintaining until the end that a king could not be judged by his subjects. He was, nevertheless, found guilty of treason against his people. On January 30, 1649, King Charles I, dressed in 2 heavy shirts to prevent shivering from the cold, and thus appearing afraid, was led onto a scaffold erected outside the banqueting house in Whitehall, London. Before the blade fell, he gave a final speech, maintaining that the people's liberty consisted in having of government those laws by which their life and their goods may be most their own. It is not for having share in government. A moment later, the executioner raised the king's severed head, displaying it to the silent, shocked crowd. With a single, clean stroke, the king who believed he was above the law was transformed into a headless martyr, and the 1,000-year-old monarchy of England was dissolved, ushering in the short-lived republic known as the Commonwealth.